that female protagonist and why we were so interested in her is that she's not a hero. You know, she's an anti-hero because the choices that she makes, you could say, arguably, are sometimes criminal, you know, sometimes misguided. And yet what we were interested in when we read the book was this idea of someone making a series of bad choices. And yes, in this movie version, it's all on one night.
Hi, Chris Bunbury with JoBlo.com.
Hello, Chris.
So I want to start with Vanessa. So I have to ask, so stories about people living on the margins. I feel like nowadays we don't really get these in mainstream movies anymore. I feel like everybody's always kind of focused on the lives of the ultra wealthy. And I have to ask, as a producer and an actor, what was the most important thing for you to capture about this world and the world of your character?
Yeah, it felt, yeah, so I'm so touched that you feel like that, that you say that, because that's exactly the reason why we wanted to do it. And also amazing that Netflix is so brave and takes risks and knows, okay, this is a really challenging story. It's really hard to read in the book and it's really hard to watch. But I think that's why we wanted to do it, because it's, you know, you read a book like that and then you start doing research and then you start actually speaking to people like Lynette. And then you start reading a lot of books, like the Matthew Desmond books that have just become such a good read. I recommend them for everybody, about poverty in America and across the world. And it just, you realize that people don't usually put them on screen. You know, people don't usually write about them. You hear them in like articles and stuff, but to actually have, and there's so many millions of stories out there that Lynette kind of represents. And you know, obviously hers is all packed into one chaotic night, you know, which a lot of people, you know, that's not necessarily true for those people, but it could be years and years and years of that level of stress of survival. And so that's why we wanted to do it.
Well, speaking of the one night thing, Benjamin, I want to ask you, how do you kind of keep the tension going throughout a movie and evoke the fact that this is all kind of unrolling over one night? Because I feel like that's a tough thing to pull off in a lot of movies.
Yeah, you have to sort of keep the ticking time bomb, you guess. You've got to set the stakes up at the beginning to make sure that you know, you understand why your protagonist is pushed to the point where she's going to go, and then you've just got to keep that tension as tight as you possibly can without letting any air in. You know, I remember when we first spoke about it, I wanted the feeling of the film to feel like one long heart attack. And I guess, you know, we just at script stage, and then when we're filming, we were constantly just making sure that those layers and layers and layers of stress was sort of, you know, kept sustaining and adding on and sustaining and adding on until the end, when you sort of get that huge release. But yeah, I looked at, you know, you sort of go back to all of the films that I loved, that were almost a genre in itself, those sort of films that take place in 24 hours. And, you know, we looked at Good Time, you know, the Safdie brothers film, even sort of Victoria was something that we watched. And then Collateral, you know, I love those films, and I love how as an audience member you're sort of just sucked into this life for this sort of brief amount of time, and you go with it. It almost feels like it's happening real time.
Getting back to what I was talking about before a bit, Vanessa, at the beginning of the movie, there's kind of some news blasts where people are talking about how a lot of people don't have, you know, $1,000 saved, and one thing can kind of push people over to the edge. What do you hope in an audience that watches this movie, that, you know, there's going to be two parts of the audience. There's going to be those that can see themselves in those characters, and then there could be those that, you know, maybe not necessarily can relate. What do you hope that they take away from a movie like this and about your character?
Yeah, and it is a difficult one, because that female protagonist and why we were so interested in her is that she's not a hero. You know, she's an anti-hero, because the choices that she makes, you could say, arguably, are sometimes criminal, you know, sometimes misguided. And yet what we were interested in when we read the book was this idea of someone making a series of bad choices. And yes, in this movie version, it's all on one night. You know, there will be a few people out there that this has happened to, that they've had one dark night of the soul where they just had enough, and it all kind of escalates and one thing leads to another, which is really what the film is. But also to frame it within the context of, this is a system which doesn't support people that are living on the edge and that are trying to survive, and that are she's made the biggest effort of her entire life to try and and attach to this idea of this will give us some kind of safety and also some kind of internal safety that she's never felt in her life. And I think the complexity of the whole story in the book is that she has to go inside and find that internal safety inside herself before she can realize it in the outside world. And so I guess we were interested in a complicated female protagonist who's not necessarily likable all the time, and yet you understand why she's doing it. It's not either earnest and noble and, I'm a hero, or I'm a terrible person. It's more like, this is a very vulnerable woman, so vulnerable, and has experienced so much and is trying really hard and sometimes makes wrong decisions because she doesn't have a system that says, no, why don't you choose this and not this? Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for your time, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you too.
Bye.
Thank you for lovely questions.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for clicking on our video, everybody. If you like what you saw here, please make sure you like the video and subscribe and share with your friends who like this sort of content. JoBlo was created by movie fans for movie fans, and we appreciate your support.